Okay, so for all of you that are just joining in for this English part of our webcast, I would like to introduce myself again, just to make sure that you didn't miss it at the beginning. My name is Veronika Dvořáková. I am an immigration specialist here at Deloitte. I'm a colleague of Jana, and I will be leading you through this English version of our webcast. Today, we will be talking about the new developments in travel rules, as you can probably say by the title. Um, Currently, in this situation during the COVID-19 pandemic, the rules are very dynamic and they are very rapidly changing. So we will try to cover the basic and the main points that are currently applicable and that are useful for your traveling. Of course, if you have any questions, please you can write them in the chat. We will make sure to answer them. And even if there is no time to answer them currently, like during this presentation, we will definitely give you the answers individually via email. So you don't need to be worried that you would be left without an answer to your question. Okay, I would like to ask for moving to the next slide of the presentation, and we will slowly get to the current traveling conditions. The travel conditions to travel outside or inside the Czech Republic are currently regularly issued by Ministry of Health. This ministry issues every 14 days 2 documents. One of them is a list of countries with low COVID-19 occurrence, which we call the green countries. And the other document is a protection measure, which is basically covering mostly the third country nationals and the red countries and the rules to travel from these countries. When we talk about the green countries, we mean the countries with low COVID-19 occurrence. That means that if you're a foreigner who is traveling into the Czech Republic from one of these countries, it is possible under the standard rules as before the pandemic. As you can see on our map, currently it is almost the whole European Union or almost the whole Europe that is under the list of the green countries. But if you would be interested in knowing what countries are third countries but still green, it is, for example, Australia, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, Tunisia, Canada, or Thailand. So these are all like the safe green countries. The rest of them, which is not mentioned by this list, we call the red countries. These are the ones where the COVID-19 occurrence is a little higher. Therefore, the traveling from these countries is based on a current protection measure that is also issued by the Ministry of Health, as I already told you. So far from the European Union, it is only Spain. However, as the situation is really changing every day and we cannot know what tomorrow brings, that is only, like temporary. And it is always good to look out for the measure before you intend to travel anywhere or before your employees want to travel into the Czech Republic. As I said in our presentation, we will mainly focus on traveling of foreigners into the Czech Republic. However, I'm sure that you would be also interested in what to do when you want to travel outside the Czech Republic, as the situation now is getting a little bit harder for us to travel. So first of all, we would like to offer some of the helpful links that might be useful to you if you are interested in this topic. The first link is the Traveler's Map by Ministry of Health. You can find it on the link that is presented on this slide, and it is the link for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Also, the European Union is updating quite regularly the Reopen Europe site. But I would mostly like to recommend you our Deloitte interactive map. It is a map that was constructed and is regularly updated by our Deloitte colleagues from around the world. And you can actually find all of the countries around the world here, and you can see what kind of social, economical, or travel impact COVID-19 had for these countries. So I think these are very important links that you might save for the future if you want to know more about traveling. Please, we can move to the next slide. And just to tell you a little bit more about which measures countries currently have for our republic to travel, we decided to list out the main or the most common countries that Czech people usually travel to. These are our neighbor countries and some of the popular destination countries. So when we look in Slovakia, we currently need to undergo a PCR test, which cannot be older than 72 hours to travel to Slovakia, or there is this possibility to register under a special registration form and have a quarantine for 5 days, after which you have to undergo the PCR test anyway. When it comes to traveling to Austria, the PCR test is also applicable here. It also doesn't. It also cannot be older than 72 hours, and there is also the possibility of quarantine and the test being done within 48 hours. Please keep in mind that so far these rules are only applicable for Prague or for citizens traveling from Prague. However, as I already mentioned, the situation is changing very rapidly, so we might expect some of the some of the changes in this area. Traveling to Germany requires an obligatory quarantine. There are some exceptions to take a PCR test instead of the quarantine. However, it is important to check exactly which of the countries or which of the regions of Germany you're traveling to, because the rules may differ a little bit. Poland so far doesn't have any restrictions for us, which is nice, but from the other countries, I would like to point out, for example, Italy, which newly issued us on the red list and requires a PCR test, which cannot be older than 72 hours, or you can undergo the test immediately after your arrival. One of the countries that has kind of like a stricter regime is Great Britain for us. You need to register your arrival in Great Britain, but you have to undergo the 14-day quarantine without an exception. So it is not enough to have a PCR test or a negative result of PCR test done. These are kind of like the European Union rules for now. However, I cannot stress this enough. It is really important to check it quite regularly when you're traveling, as these rules are really changing very rapidly and very spontaneously, I would say. We can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So back to traveling to the Czech Republic as a foreigner. As I already mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, the traveling of third country nationals is usually issued by the protection measure of the Ministry of Health. This protection measure has been with us for kind of a long time now, so we will not go into like very much of a detail, but we will cover the most important topic from this measure, so you know exactly what is new and what is important when traveling or when employing foreigners from third countries. I would say that the most important point is the exception or the entry ban to travel into the Czech Republic. This entry ban basically applies for all citizens of third countries, whose countries are not on the list of low COVID-19 occurrence. So all citizens of third countries which are red cannot enter the Czech Republic. However, luckily, we have some exceptions that we will now go through. The first of the exceptions is for foreigners who have either long-term or permanent residence in a country with low COVID-19 occurrence. Of course, there is an exception for people who have some kind of valid permit or visa given by the Czech Republic. This applies for long-term visa, long-term residence permit, or either temporary or permanent residence permit. Mm, Similar things applies for foreigners with a short-term visa, which is issued after May 11th. But keep in mind that this visa needs to be issued by the Czech Republic. That's very important to know. For foreigners who have issued a long-term or permanent residence permit in an European Union country, there's also the exception from the entry ban. And then we have the exceptions for the relatives of either Czech nationals or European Union nationals. This is either for the nationals who have residence in the Czech Republic, but there is also exception for the foreigners who are living with a Czech or EU national which has a permanent or temporary residence for more than 90 days issued. And this has to be some kind of a provable relationship. Therefore, you will need to prove that you are in the relationship and that you are sharing household with this person, and submit this sworn statement or this confirmation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then this ministry will issue this exception of the entry ban. The next exception covers all the rest of the cases. I would like to mention, for example, exception for international transport workers, members of diplomatic missions, or simply people whose arrival is in the favor of the Czech Republic, or this can be some kind of unusual urgent cases, for example, medical emergencies, but of course, these cases are considered on a case-to-case basis. We can move to the other slide, please. As these rules are very important, it is not the last thing that you will need to be aware of once traveling from a red country. It is really important to know that all of the individuals, not just the third country nationals, who have spent more than 12 hours in the last 14 days in the territory of a red country, will need to obey by some additional rules given by the protective measure. First rule is that before arriving into the Czech Republic, you will have to fill in an online arrival form. There is a website linked in the presentation, and we recommend also, for example, printing out a copy of this arrival form to present in case of any border controls. After that, after you arrive, you have to, within 5 days, undergo PCR test. And you should also, within 7 days, contact a regional public health authority and tell them the result of your test, or give them the result of your test. I would like to stress that as the authority is extremely overwhelmed with the cases, it is necessary to be proactive and to kind of provide a test result without being called out, or just do it automatically. So this is regarding the test. Even if you have a negative test result of the PCR test, you are still restricted from free movement after another 10 days after your arrival. This restriction means that you can do just the basic task as going to work, going shopping for the necessary things, or some urgent and necessary medical checkups. However, it shouldn't be more than that. You are, of course, there's of course possibility to start working and enter the workplace after you arrive from a third country, but you will need to present a negative PCR result to your employer to be able to enter the workplace. There's an exception from these rules, and that is for people who are only transiting and under 12 hours. Therefore, you don't need the PCR test or to be quarantined. So this is an exception for the transiting people. There are several updates from last time that the measurement was issued. The first one is that the authority now recognizes also a PCR test from another European Union country, but this test should not be older than 72 hours. As I talked about entering the workplace with a PCR test, with a negative PCR test, it is important to know that now only one test will be will be necessary, and you do not need to provide the employer the second test as it was before. So this is another update that we think is kind of nice for both foreigners and employees to start working as soon as possible. And another of the exceptions or the updates is that the PCR test or the quarantine requirement is not applicable for children who are under 5 years old. I would just like to add that in the list of countries with low occurrence of COVID-19, there are also countries which have a kind of an asterisk with their name. These countries have also the rule that once you travel outside of these countries into the Czech Republic, you will need to present the negative PCR test result before entering the workplace. And these countries specifically are Belgium, Bulgaria, Luxembourg, and Malta. We have covered the rules for the foreigner or the individual. However, there are also some rules for the employer who is employing third country nationals that come from red countries, and we will cover them in the next slide. So for all the entities who are accepting foreigners, either for any economical purpose or educational purpose, that means an employer or a school, they are obliged to ensure accommodation for the whole length of the stay of the foreigner, and also they are obliged to ensure healthcare provision for the whole length of stay. This is on top of the rule that they shouldn't let the foreigner in without a PCR test, as we talked about in the previous slide. One update is here for valid only for the European Union and short-term visa holders, and that is the healthcare provision, but also the ability to ensure the return to home country in case of loss of purpose of stay in the Czech Republic. This basically means that if the foreigner, for example, loses his job in the Czech Republic, the employer is obliged to ensure the return to the home country because of this loss. The important thing for employers especially is that this confirmation or this guarantee has to be provided to the embassy by the foreigner before collection of the entry visa. So you will have to guarantee this on the paper with this confirmation that will be given to the embassy so that they can issue the entry visa to the specific foreigner. We can move to the next slide. As we covered the situation regarding traveling and the health measurements, it is also important to know what happens after or what you need to do after, especially when it comes to immigration authorities' offices. As you may know, the immigration authorities' offices were kind of closed in the emergency regime. They had limited processes, limited office hours, and longer deadlines. Fortunately, we can say that they resumed back to standard office hours, even in this time when the current situation requires offices to work only with a limited number of days and hours a week. The immigration authorities office is still working fully. The only office that shortened their working hours is the foreign police, which only works for 2 days a week for now. The entry to the immigration office is allowed in the first 10 days after arrival, however, only with a negative PCR test. And we know from our experience that the officers are really needing to be presented with this PCR test with the negative result. So this is an important step to be able to visit the office. There are some appointments that can be done without booking in advance. These are usually appointments that are somehow urgent or have a necessity of the personal attendance. We can name, for example, the registration after arrival, or the bridge visa issuance, or, for example, issuance of a departure order. Of course, the rules to enter are ultimately depending on the office in charge, so it is also good to maybe check before visiting the office, just to make sure that everything is in order and there is no other exception or no other rule for you. There are also actions that don't have the necessity of personal attendance, and we would like to recommend you that to use these kind of actions. It is mainly considering, for example, renewal of permits or change notifications. These kinds of processes can be done not personally, but via either post office or a data box, which we think is a nice way to avoid visiting the office if it's not absolutely necessary in regards to the COVID-19. But please be aware that as the authority resumed all of the legal requirements, some of the applications or some of the processes need to be done personally by the immigration law. This is currently valid again. It was stopped during the emergency regime. However, it is important to keep it for now, as today we are still the authority is still working under the immigration law. They also resumed the standard deadlines without giving the prolongation. So this is also new, and of course they are not or they are reviewing back the notifications of changes obligation. Therefore, there are no exceptions to postpone this anymore. This applies mostly for the address, marital status, or the travel documents changes. Another thing that the authority did is prolonged for the second time the short-term visas with the purpose of work until November 16th. But it is important to know that also the employment relations between employer and employee are or have to be prolonged, or you have to form another of these relations. We can move to the next slide, please, where we will discuss current situation at the Czech embassies. Czech embassies are currently divided into three main categories. The first category is considering the currently fully opened embassies. These are the embassies that are processing all of the previous and standard visa or permit issuing or submitting applications. These embassies are listed in the presentation. You can see that these are mostly the European Union countries, but there are several of the third countries as well. Then the rest of the embassies resume their services partially. We will talk about what exactly can be submitted at these embassies in our next slide. However, it is good to know that only one embassy is shut down completely still, and this is the embassy in Santiago de Chile. We can please turn to another slide. So the scope of operations that the embassies which are partially resumed are currently handling is listed in this presentation. Mainly these are Schengen visas of relatives of European Union nationals or Czech citizens. Schengen visas can be also submitted for international transport workers, for diplomats, for seasonal workers, and of course for the essential workers, which are healthcare, social services, and food industry workers. There's a little update for your employees that are either highly qualified or key or scientific and would like to apply for a Schengen visa with the purpose of work. This can be done once these employees fulfill the conditions for the government programs listed in the presentation, the key personal program and the highly qualified employee program. This means that the employee or the employer doesn't need to be enrolled. The company itself doesn't need to be enrolled in the programs. However, the employee that is aiming for this visa needs to meet the conditions of the program. Then the embassies also resumed the Schengen visas with purpose of work for Ukraine citizens, which are submitting the applications in Ukraine. There is a daily limit for each embassy in Kiev and Lvov, and that is 300 applications per day. Next, I think kind of the most important category for a lot of employers is the long-term visas and permits. These visas are being issued currently for seasonal workers, for workers who have some kind of exceptional working visas, workers with scientific research purposes or education, and also for family reunification. Please be aware that the family reunification also only covers spouses and underage children reunited with foreigners who are already in possession of some kind of either long-term or permanent residency permit at the territory of the Czech Republic. We get asked quite often if it's already possible to submit applications for the long-term visas or permits for other of the relatives of these foreigners. However, for now, unfortunately, it is only applicable for the spouses or underage children. Most of the permits, such as employee card or work permit, etc., are now submitted via the key personal highly qualified or qualified employee programs. These are all the government programs which are currently guaranteed by the Ministry of Industry and Trade. And for now, this is on these embassies the only way to apply for the standard permits, such as an employee card. From our point of view and from our experience, we would really like to recommend enrolling the company into these kind of programs and checking if the company meets the conditions of the program, as we know that the situation is changing very, very rapidly and is kind of unpredictable. And this is currently kind of a safe way to ensure that your employees or your future employees can be transferred or relocated into the Czech Republic in your company. So this is, of course, a good thing to know. There's an update again at the embassies, and that is that for now, the blue card application does no longer have to be applied by enrollment into the government programs, but you can apply for a blue card separately, like in the standard way before. The last thing that is important for to know regarding the embassies is that they have resumed all of the proceedings in the long-term visa and permit applications, which were initiated before March 14th. As you may know, in the emergency regime, the embassies stopped their work completely, and that means that they have stopped some of the proceedings as well. So for now, for these embassies, these proceedings should be in the running again. So you should expect, if you have any applications like this, you should expect a decision very soon if you don't already have it. Okay, so as we reached the end of our presentation, I would just like to look into the questions if we have any, and perhaps answer if you have any of the questions. Okay, there's just one question for the English part, and that is, what if you are only transiting through the UK, for example, arrive in Heathrow for a connecting flight out from Heathrow? I'm not sure if this is considering traveling outside of the Czech Republic through UK, but we will definitely check this, because this is kind of a gray zone even in the Czech Republic, and we had experienced that with other countries, that even if you didn't need the test, they actually required it at the airport. So we will double check this and let you know via email, definitely. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I would like to thank you very much all for listening. I hope the presentation was useful for you, and of course, if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us in the chat, and we will answer them as quickly as possible. So thank you very much for listening, and wish you a great rest of the day.